The president admitted yesterday that Americans could feel some pain from the impending tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China, expected to go into effect tomorrow. He has argued that the tariffs are necessary to stem the flow of fentanyl and migrants across the U.S. border.
This is retaliatory. This is retaliatory to a certain extent. Millions of people flowed into our country through Mexico and Canada, and we're not going to allow that.
To say the least, it has been a busy couple of weeks of controversial executive orders and discussions about cabinet positions being confirmed. Democrats in the minority now in both houses of Congress. So what is the plan to keep the president in check? Senator Kirsten Gillibrand with us in studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
The tariffs has to be where we start. This has been a weekend of uncertainty with allies both north and south, trying to understand what Donald Trump's actual concern is and how they could resolve it in some sort of better way. What are you hearing about the status of these tariffs?
Well, when you put a large tariff on countries that you buy things from, the cost of the things you buy is going to go up. So Mexico, we buy tequila, beer, avocados, tomatoes. Sounds like Super Bowl is going to get much more expensive. Mm-hmm. From Canada, we buy things like lumber. So if we want to build more affordable housing and get rent prices down, that's going to be very difficult. We buy food from Canada. And so lots of things that people are going to go to the grocery store and would normally buy for a few dollars is now going to go up significantly.
There is a substantial disruption. Let's go upstate and talk about whether it's the auto industry or another industry. Mm-hmm. For example, a typical car, there will be one portion of the manufacturing process
Correct.
On the Ontario side, one portion of it on the American side, and that pieces of that car might cross the border 5 times, not affected by tariffs. It gets very complicated to unravel that in terms
Correct.
of what it means to the U.S. economy.
For upstate New York, we have so many businesses that do exactly as you described. They have inputs from Canada to build a product to sell. And if you can't easily or affordably get those inputs, it's going to disrupt your whole manufacturing supply chain. And that will mean the cost of things go up, the cost of things like cars, the cost of electronics. There's a lot of symbiosis between Canada and New York in terms of, we send school groups up there, they send their school groups down here. Mm-hmm. A lot of that's going to be disrupted because the normal patterns between Canada and the United States are going to change. I think what President Trump is doing is harmful. It's creating chaos. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to have the impact that he's hoping it has. It's just going to raise costs for everyday Americans.
Ultimately, though, isn't chaos what America voted for? They knew what they were getting this time with Trump, right?
Well, you know, we've done a lot of listening and talking to voters around New York, voters around the country about what the last election for them was. And they want things like their grocery costs to go down. And what we are seeing from President Trump is the exact opposite. And so we are going to be laser focused on all these promises made, and these are all promises denied. He is not getting the cost of food down, he's raising them. He's not getting the cost of housing down, he's raising it. And it's going to have an impact, I think, that voters will realize they were sold a false bill of goods, that President Trump lied to get elected and unfortunately has no intention of coming through for the American people.
Democrats in the minority in the House, Democrats in the minority in the Senate. What levers are available to you for the next 2 years?
Well, first of all, we're the party in opposition, and that means we will oppose things that President Trump is doing that are harmful. Anything that hurts New Yorkers, we will fight against tooth and nail. Procedurally, it's hard to block things because we don't have a majority. So it's very hard to be effective in blocking something outright unless it has that 60 vote threshold. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we can come together and block things, which we have tried to do. Nominees that we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks, they only need 51 votes. And so if the Republicans are united, they can have anybody they want. I personally was very concerned about the person who was selected to be the head of the military, the Secretary of Defense. And we were able to get 3 Republicans to try to block him, but we failed. We needed 4. So that's the reality of being in the minority. It's hard to stop President Trump from doing things, but we can talk about and raise up for our voters and for the American people the harm he's creating every day.
Democrats seem demoralized right now. Voters sent a message that some Democrats weren't ready to hear. What will change in the way you represent New Yorkers in the next couple of years? Are you responding to that?
So we in New York understood that voters weren't being heard. And so one thing I worked on the last cycle was creating a coordinated campaign in New York. And we were in the communities 2 years before the election. So we had lost 5 seats in 2022 in the House. And so my ambition was to win them back and to hold some red or purple seats we already had. So we had 7 battleground seats, and we won 5 out of 7 because we were listening 2 years out. We understood that the 2 main issues that New Yorkers cared about was the cost of their groceries, the cost of housing, the cost of fuel, the things that matter at their kitchen table every day, and public safety. They wanted to make sure their kids could walk to school safely. They could walk across the park so that they could walk from the subway to their school. Those things were really important. And if you weren't talking about those 2 things, affordability and safety, then voters thought, you're not talking about me and my family, and so maybe you don't understand what I'm going through. And so our candidates did that, and they won. So the most important thing about elections is to listen and understand what are your voters and people you want to represent need from you, and are you working on those things? Are you delivering for them, and are you talking about that?
I want to finish up with what's mostly been a city and state issue, except there's some Trump overhang on this one as well, which is the controversy over the congestion pricing toll. Views have shifted a little bit. A lot of people have said, this is working as intended. When I need to go to the city in a car, I can get there in a hurry, but the traffic isn't quite as crippling. Have you seen people moderate their views in the last couple of weeks that they might want to see how this works?
So everything's preliminary. We don't have all the data. I do think the FDR is a little more crowded. I think the West Side Highway is a little more crowded. And I think different boroughs are having a tougher time. So you look at places like Queens or the Bronx, they're seeing more traffic. If you're in Lower Manhattan, you are so happy because less traffic, unless you might be a small business owner who wants that traffic. So there seems to be positives and negatives. We'll assess it over the next few months.
Would it be appropriate for Trump to get in the middle of it now, or
well,
should it be allowed?
He's just political, so he's just trying to win political points. What I want to make sure is that the people who are bearing the burden, it's not disproportionately harming critical workers. I want to make sure we can look at waivers for firefighters because they need to drive into the city with their equipment because there's toxins on their equipment. And if you don't let them drive in, they would be taking public transportation with toxins sitting right next to you with their equipment. So I want to make sure we can look at waivers for firefighters, for first responders, for the kinds of public servants who don't get to choose their hours and have to come in off hours, and such as nurses, critical workers. We want to look at the people who really are bearing quite a burden because it's very expensive for them. We also have to look at the cost of things going up because of deliveries. So I want to look at that. So I think this was a state decision and this is a legislative decision, but we should look at how we can improve the impact on people who can't afford it and see what are the good points and what are the bad points and look at it. But we should not assume it's perfect, and we should not assume that changes aren't needed. I've heard from a lot of people who are still very concerned about the weight that they are paying.
What do you make of our Democratic mayor trying to make some new friends?
It's his right. And you know, at the end of the day, you know, for myself, I always work on a bipartisan basis. I think it's so important that you get things done for the American people. So I think talking to people on the other side of the aisle is just fine. And at the end of the day, this is something the voters will be deciding.
Good to have you on this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your communities, click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV for the latest news and weather updates every 10 minutes and more. We'll see you then.